Good morning, y'all. Josh's Severe Weather here to discuss the storm system that's going to be impacting all of us here in the central and eastern United States over the next 3 to 4 days. I'm going to share my screen with you. If you could like and subscribe, like this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel if you want to get the latest on this upcoming weather pattern that we're in, and that does not involve a lot of snow on the eastern seaboard. It's just been a very mild start to the year. In fact, one of the warmest 5 years in the eastern United States on record so far. Now we're only 10 days into the year, so things can obviously change on a dime. But let's talk about two big storms that are going to be impacting the central and eastern United States. Storm number one, impacting California right now, will move into the central part of the country here by midweek, so by Wednesday morning, and that will be cutting northeastward across the Great Lakes. That's a storm track that we've seen quite commonly here, no matter if it's cold or warm. And what that's going to do is draw moisture up from the Gulf of Mexico and lead to some severe weather down south as we get into later Wednesday night and Thursday, and maybe Thursday evening as well. What's also going to happen is we are going to see a coastal low pressure forming off of the Carolina coastline here at the end of the week. That is going to zip up the coast and impact Atlantic Canada and eastern New England by the end of the weekend. Where this ends up is going to be what I'm going to talk about a little bit more in this video, but you can be guaranteed that it's going to be windy and wet here along the coastline as we end the week. Also, I'm going to talk about the threat for snow, who's going to see snow, who's not, and who's going to see I say wintry mix on the map. Really, it's rain ending as a period of snow or a changeover to snow, depending on where you live here in the mountains and in the Great Lakes. But some folks could see a lot of snowfall out of this storm, and that carries on into Canada. So I'm going to talk about all of that as well, and what's in the upcoming future. Let's take a look at tropicaltidbits.com and take a look at where our storm is now. It's battering California. It began to rain and storm during last night's championship game. If you stuck around, I know I was in bed at midnight, and I think one team was as well, unfortunately. That's just how it goes sometimes. But congrats to UGA. Well done. Very, very significant and successful season. Reminds me of the dominance of LSU back in 2019. Maybe because I'm from Baton Rouge and that's the team I pull for. But anyway, getting back to the weather here, we are going to see this storm over California moving into the Rocky Mountains tonight and into the morning on Wednesday with heavy mountain snow. Salt Lake City is going to get more snow once again, especially the ski areas off to the east. We also have a northern branch feature which will produce some light snow over the Lake Superior region and in northwestern Ontario. That's going to be a little bit less of a player in the picture, whereas the storm in the southern branch is going to take over. And that's very common for La Nina, where we see the subtropical branch become more active than the northern branch, which is why it's not been really that cold this winter across the eastern and southern United States. It's been warmer than average. I realize there was one massive exception. That was the cold outbreak right before Christmas that was well advertised. But if you take those 3 to 4 days of extreme cold and you bring in the 2 months of warmth that we've had, December and January, then that certainly wipes out the cold that we've had. And it's been a warm winter. And the reason why is that we have a storm track that comes through the plains and then rather than cuts eastward, because of the warmer Atlantic, because of the active subtropical jet, and because of the lack of a really dense cold air mass. We do have cold air in Canada, no question about it. What happens is this low pressure track, when it encounters the Appalachians, instead of going straight across and allowing cold air to pour southward, what happens is this warm air that's over the Gulf of Mexico in the southeast wins out every single time. And if you are a snow lover in the Northeast, and I know there's a lot of you, and they come out a lot on weather Twitter, then this is not what you want to see. And unfortunately, I don't think the next few weeks we're going to see much change to that. Really, what we need to see is this storm system, as it moves up to the Northeast, break into what's called a Miller B storm, which moves up the East Coast. And by then, as the colder air wraps in behind it, we see moisture thrown back into that chillier air. And that's when the heavy wet snow can occur. Now, yesterday's models were starting to hint at something like that happen. You see this low pressure move up through the Great Lakes Thursday night, and it'll produce thunderstorms from Pennsylvania to Florida. What's going to happen is we've got a secondary low which will form. Now, the model runs that I was looking at around lunchtime yesterday were very much latching on to low pressure coming right up the East Coast into Maine and New Brunswick. Now, what's changed is today, the low pressure forms a little bit farther off the coast, and because of that, the moisture does not get thrown back far enough into the cold air to produce significant East Coast snow. In fact, where the snow is going to be significant, I believe, will be across Atlantic Canada and possibly far eastern Maine as we get later on into this upcoming weekend. There's even a third low that forms, which I'm not really going to stress about because by then the cold air is starting to leave. You can see these red dashed lines. Those indicate warmer air masses, warmer thicknesses is what we call them. Thickness is the depth of the air from 1,000 millibars up to 500. When they turn red, it's just too warm in the air from the ground up for anything to fall but rain. Generally speaking, there could be a frozen layer that causes some frozen precip. But so what we see is storm tracks too far out to sea this weekend to produce any moisture that's going to impact anybody. But you will see a lot of wind across New England, so it's going to feel cold. We're just not going to see enough of the moisture to really cause an impact other than across Atlantic Canada. So another opportunity missed here in the coastal Northeast, from Virginia on up into coastal Maine and Nova Scotia. Here's the next storm, by the way. You can see California gets battered. All of this green and heavy yellows and reds and oranges producing heavy rain over the northern and central California coast, heavy snow here in the mountains. This next storm is going to follow almost the exact same track as the first one. This one actually cuts a little farther northwest, which means rather than talking about snow backing up to near Chicago and Michigan, we're talking rain next Monday and Tuesday and more thunderstorms down south, maybe a little bit more severe weather once again. And if you've watched my videos of the last couple of weeks, you'll know that I'm really expecting a much above average severe weather year and rain year here across parts of the Mid-South. In traditional Dixie Alley and maybe later on across Tornado Alley in Kansas and Oklahoma. So this low track cuts up through the Great Lakes. This is about a week from today. And we see yet more rain in the Carolinas and Southeast, some thunderstorms as well. The storm track beyond it here cuts a little bit farther southeast, but the cold air is not really in place for this to produce anything but rain, at least at this time. We'll keep an eye on the interior Northeast for maybe some wet snow. Here's the storm after it. This one actually looks like it's going to track farther off to the north and west. So could be another big snowfall in the Twin Cities, but more likely across Superior and back in the Dakotas than across Wisconsin and Iowa and Illinois. Again, this is a week and a half off, so it will probably change. But notice once again, we're looking at yet another push of warm, humid air into the southeast, more heavy rain and thunderstorms, and there could be some severe weather just based on what I'm seeing here with the frontal position and the tightening up of the thickness lines, meaning there'll be some strong winds aloft in here, ushering this milder air up into the Great Lakes. So we see a storm track that cuts right through the eastern Great Lakes this week, and then next week cuts through the western Great Lakes, and then the following storm goes across northern New England, and the following one goes even west of the Great Lakes. So no sign of very cold air in place at all, other than some fleeting cold, which may produce snow in the higher elevations of the Northeast and mainly New England by the time we get to the weekend after next. After that, there is certainly some signal that there'll be colder weather coming in for the final week. And well, I say final week, but the week of January 23rd, really the last 7 or 8 days of the month, it looks like it'll start turning colder. But you see all this warm air in the west here. What that means is we've got opportunities for cold to push its way down into New England, and maybe towards the end of January we start to see a better shot at maybe seeing some wintry weather in the Northeast. But I don't want to promise it just yet, because every time the GFS has shown something in the longer range, about 2 weeks or more beyond, it ends up correcting itself to a milder weather pattern. What we're really going to need to see is this ridge here in the west be a little bit farther off to the west. Rather than across the plains, we want to see it over the Rockies or even the interior of the Pacific Northwest, which would allow more cold to come down west of the Great Lakes rather than east of the Great Lakes. But regardless, I think our temperature pattern does shift into a colder final 7 to 8 days of the month of January. So again, if you're in the west, you're going to see a stormy pattern over the next 2 weeks. But the good news is once this ridge establishes itself after about the 21st and 22nd, aside from maybe the Pacific Northwest getting heavy rain in places like Seattle, the Olympic Peninsula, snow in the mountains, and that could continue, we see relief coming for California, thank goodness. And by the time we get to the last week of the month, California could still see rain, but the flooding and the atmospheric river and the bomb cyclones that splash into the northern and central coast of California come to an end. All right, so let me break down some details for you guys here. I'm going to try to be fast. California, we've talked about the heavy rain. We've got the potential here for significant rain through, looks like about the 20th. And at that point, I think our total rainfall amounts for many places in the interior of northern and central Cal are going to be over a foot of rain. The Bay Area, probably 3 to 6 inches. Southern Cal, 1 to 3 inches. With the high areas, the highlands, San Gabriel Mountains, maybe getting 3 to 5 inches of rain, and a ton of snow across the mountains as well. We look at snow totals through the 23rd, 24th, in excess of about 12 to 14 feet over the highest ground. So people out west, or people in the east, are saying right now, what do I need to do to get some snow? I say go out to Tahoe or Truckee or somewhere out there in Northern California. It's going to get clobbered with heavy snowfall. Looking eastward here, this is the GFS once again. We see the milder air moving into the east. There may be some snow over the northern Great Lakes, but primarily at this point, we're watching for the severe weather potential to start to unfold during the day on Thursday. And I think that's mainly Tennessee, Mississippi, northeast Louisiana, and then eventually northwestern Alabama on Thursday, and then spreading eastward into Georgia Thursday afternoon and evening, and maybe into the western Carolinas. There is an isolated severe threat. Now, this is not going to be, in my opinion, a big tornado outbreak, although I would not be shocked if there were a tornado watch and maybe a few tornado warnings. I think primarily we're looking at a squall line and intense wind, with a very tiny chance for some hail, but mainly intense wind. But notice on the GFS, our low pressure system tracks up to about Cleveland and Erie Thursday afternoon. So all that milder air comes up west of the Appalachians, and we could hear some thunder and see some lightning over West Virginia, Southeast Ohio, and even into Western Pennsylvania. The snow across New England is going to be fairly light to moderate before we see a change over to rain. With the exception of the higher elevations in New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine, this is primarily going to be rain, but there could be heavy snow there. With this low track, though, up the St. Lawrence, out ahead of it, it's going to be cold enough for heavy snow in places like Montreal, Quebec City, and even Ottawa, Ontario in Canada, for those of you watching from Ontario. And then that spreads over northern Maine into northern New Brunswick and right into the St. Lawrence Seaway over here. So we look at a very heavy band of snow falling throughout the length of the storm Thursday night and Friday, but it's going to be pretty much missing the United States. There will be backside snow here. We will have snow showers falling and maybe a few inches accumulating over the Smokies and over the West Virginia and Western Maryland and Pennsylvania highlands. But this does not look to be a major snowfall. We could see some snow in Kansas City. Chicago, it looked like there would be a band of heavy snow setting up close by to you on Thursday. Now that has shifted, and it no longer looks like really any significant snow in Chicago. The chance for snow really doesn't get going until we get into Michigan and especially around Lake Huron. Then the other thing we're watching is a second low pressure system on the GFS and the other models as well. And we've got this upper level trough starting to go negative. The problem here is that we don't have these red lines advancing back towards New York City and Long Island. If we did, we would have this low kind of trying to cut up into Long Island or eastern New England, which would produce very heavy snow. And the European model did show that happening around lunchtime yesterday. If I advance that for you, you can see here heading. I'm sorry, it loaded the 12Z on me. Let me show you the 12. You see Friday, a big rainfall for the East Coast, and then here is what the European was showing, and that is these lines advancing back to New Jersey, New York City, indicating a south-southeasterly flow aloft. That draws storms back in from the Atlantic into New England. The European was showing that yesterday, which would mean a heavy band of snow falling in the Hudson Valley and Delaware Valley. Now, if we fast forward that to the run this morning, we see that that low is much farther east, and the lines are more out of the south than the south-southeast. And that will mean is that the potential for a heavy band of snow just doesn't really happen here across the Hudson Valley, the Delaware Valley. There could be snowflakes, and even, the European is showing even around the Tidewater of Virginia, we start to see a few snowflakes on Saturday, but nothing that I don't think is going to stick to the ground. So there's some instability. There is a potential that we see snowflakes in the New York City area Saturday night, but not really anything that's going to amount to anything significant. And I guess we could say the snow drought's probably more than likely going to continue. Snow totals on the European model, since I just showed that to you, you guys can see there'll be a few inches back around Kansas City, and then the snow starts going here in southwestern Michigan Thursday night. We see some snow across the interior of the Northeast, but not a whole lot. But really, our heavy band of snow goes from Lake Huron area, maybe Saginaw, on up into areas north of Toronto and towards Ottawa and up into Montreal, where we see the potential for maybe up to a foot of snow falling Thursday night, Friday, and Friday night. And then that carries on into Atlantic Canada away from the coastline. You can see, though, there will be significant snow across the Cumberland Plateau, across the higher ground of Kentucky and Ohio, and maybe a little bit of snow over Indiana and Ohio, but not really a whole lot, maybe an inch or so. Really, the heavy snow is confined to those higher elevations over 3,000 or 4,000 feet from the southern Appalachians on up into western Pennsylvania. You can see here in the Northeast, and let me zoom that in for you guys so you can get a closer look. Saturday night, the European still holds on to the potential for a narrow band of snow. So this is not to say that New York City is not going to see any snow falling. In fact, there could be what we call a deformation band that allows an area of snow to sit over this area. So the chances aren't super high that New York City sees an inch or more of snow, but they are there. So just something to keep in mind. And this could shift south and west back towards Philly or Wilmington, Delaware. Probably a lot less likely, though, that we see it in the DC area and Baltimore. It's probably more likely here in southwest New England and the New York City tri-state area. But this will be out of here, and we see things very quickly warming up again next week. The GFS model has less snow than what we've seen on the European here across Missouri and Kansas and up into Illinois, but shows the heavy mountain snow. It also shows a major snowfall here over far northern Maine and over parts of Quebec and the St. Lawrence Seaway, where we do see the potential for about a foot of snow falling. So this will be a major snowfall, no question about it, but not really for anybody aside from northern Maine and the White Mountains of New Hampshire and the St. Lawrence Valley as well. The Storm Prediction Center, I have mentioned severe weather here today. It's got a marginal risk for some severe weather across southern and central California. We could have some hail and some strong winds affecting Southern California, including the LA Basin, right on up through about Monterey Bay and to Stockton, California, and Fresno, California. We also could see later on this evening in the Southern Nevada region, maybe some severe weather around Las Vegas, not quite to Flagstaff, but maybe up to like Cedar City and southwestern Utah. As we get to tomorrow, Wednesday, especially towards the evening, there is a marginal risk for severe weather. I would not be shocked if a slight risk showed up in here over southeast Arkansas, northwestern Mississippi, and the Delta region, but that would not be until late Wednesday night. And then during the day on Thursday, that severe weather threat shifts east into Louisiana and Mississippi in the morning, and then in the afternoon, evening, Alabama, Georgia, southern Tennessee, and perhaps upstate South Carolina could have the risk for severe weather late in the day Thursday, and in particular Thursday night. By the time this goes to about Charlotte and when it gets to about Rock Hill and Augusta, Georgia, the threat for severe weather is kind of waning later Thursday night, but there may be a squall line that produces widespread strong to severe thunderstorms with straight line winds being the main threat. And I think that'll be across the Metrolina region and down into central parts of the panhandle of Florida by daybreak on Friday. Farther east, that threat for severe weather does start to wane a little bit more. Finally, I'll look at temperatures before I let you guys go for the day, and you'll see that the warm air is advancing. We're talking about highs today that reach the 60s, and then tomorrow that reach the mid to upper 70s. And then as we get on into Thursday, it's warming up into the 50s in Pittsburgh and 60s in Johnson City, Tennessee, maybe even pushing close to 70 south of Raleigh, North Carolina, towards places like Clinton and Fayetteville and Columbia. Mid to upper 70s in South Georgia and across much of the Florida Peninsula. Vacationers are going to love that for sure. On Friday, that mild air pushes up the East Coast, and we see 50s across the seacoast of Maine while it's snowing heavily in northern Maine. So a big contrast in temperatures stretching across New England, across the middle of Pennsylvania, and right on through central Georgia and down to the southeast. It'll turn colder behind this front Friday. We see temps back in the 30s and dropping into the 20s at night. And that's where the snow piles up Friday night, Saturday morning here in the Appalachians. But a lot colder day on Saturday. After we go from the 70s here on Thursday in North Carolina, we have highs in the low to mid 40s on Saturday. So the heat will be cranking once again here with that drastic temperature change coming. And in Florida, We still have one mild day in South Florida, but Central and North Florida on Saturday will be quite chilly, with temperatures barely getting out of the 50s, and then slowly moderating for Sunday, which will start to warm back up here as the Pacific jet once again takes over, and temperatures are going above freezing across everywhere but the interior northeast during the day on Sunday. And then early next week, you see the warm air advancing. Once again, it's not looking wintry at all the first half of next week. It'll be kind of chilly here east of the Appalachians, 40s and 50s, but that's pretty much seasonal, and then above average temperatures across the Gulf South. I really appreciate y'all's time today. Again, if you could, please like this video. Feel free to comment on it with any questions. Let's keep it respectful, please. That's my only request. Please subscribe to the channel if you're a new viewer of Josh's Severe Weather, and please invite your friends as well. I really appreciate y'all's time, and I wish you many blessings. And I want to give all the glory to God through his son, Jesus Christ, which is the reason that I'm doing what I'm doing. It's that I've been called to be a meteorologist, and I've been called to also spread the word of God through the many gifts that he's given me. And that's just the gift of communicating weather and communicating my beliefs to you. Those of you that are returning guests of mine, returning viewers, know that I like to read a verse at the end. And the verse that really resonates with me is Romans 8:28. And that really is my way of not worrying about the future, knowing that, and we know that God causes all things to work together for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. And I believe that I've been called here to share my personal beliefs and to help give you guys a way of seeing that despite uncertainty in the world, despite the anxiety that you may or may not have, which is the case for many believers and non-believers, that the truth that God is there to provide goodness to us is comfort. And I seek comfort in God every day through staying in the Word, through seeing people coming together in difficult times, through seeing the relief efforts during major storms like we see in California now, or like we saw in southwestern Florida back at the end of September. And that is God causes all things, the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. So if you're not a believer, that's quite all right, because I wasn't for 30 years, but know that that there is a way. There's a way to reduce that anxiety and put complete faith through the word of God, by hearing that word and by knowing that Jesus Christ has been sacrificed for us to have eternal life, John 3:16. And all it takes is just a little encouragement and gathering around other people who are believers, and just seeing that there's some light at the end of the darkness. So I could get into it and talk about it for days. I'm not going to do that, but I really appreciate y'all's time. If you have any prayer requests, please don't be bashful. I'm happy to pray for you guys. I think the more people that pray for each other, the better. We saw the power of prayer last week when Hamlin was critically injured in the Monday night game, and how God is working through him and through all of those who treated him and prayed for him on the field in Buffalo, as well as, or I think it was Cincinnati, as well as just people praying. And if somebody can do that for a sports figure, I don't see why we can't do it for each other, even just us regular folks. So that's all I've got for you guys, but God bless you. I hope you have a great day. Be safe, and look forward to talking with you again tomorrow.